Welcome to episode number 2 of Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast. Thank you all for being here. My name is Reika and I am your host. So today I wanted to introduce myself, who I am and my yoga teacher background, my journey. I will not be sharing the whole journey, the whole story, and that is because it'll probably take forever. It'll take a really long time to share my whole story, but I want to share a little bit at a time as the podcast goes on. So today I want to share a little bit about why I started this podcast and also my journey. First of all, you might be able to notice from my accent that I am not from English-speaking country. I was born in Nepal, which is a small country above India, and I moved to Japan when I was 1 year old. I grew up in Japan, and I lived in Japan until I was 12 or 13 years old. It was the year 2000 that I moved from Japan to United States. I only knew how to speak Japanese when I lived in Japan and grew up in Japan. So I learned English much later in my life. Because I was still young, I was able to learn English pretty well and quite fast. But you will probably hear me in this podcast as we go on that my English is not perfect. I make mistakes and I have an accent. So I get asked a lot where I'm from due to my accent. So I wanted to clear that up and share that with you. My first language is Japanese, and I learned English a little bit later in life when I was 12 or 13. I have a Japanese mother and American father, and I grew up in a household where both of my parents practiced Buddhism. And I think I wanted to share that because that is relevant to why and how I became interested in yoga in the first place. Fast forward, after moving to the United States, I lived in Colorado for a bit and I moved to California, Long Beach for my college. I studied sociology. I did a study abroad for 1 semester in South Africa during my undergrad. And I fell in love with South Africa. So when I came back from South Africa, I made a decision to finish my undergraduate as fast as possible and go back to South Africa for my master's degree so I can live there again. And it was around the time after coming back from South Africa the first time, I started to kind of explore a little bit about yoga. What is this practice about? Went to yoga class at a 24-hour fitness with my mother. I signed up for 1 week trial at a local yoga studio with my sister around that time. So this is a time that yoga kind of was in my radar. In the beginning, I did not have love at first sight experience with yoga. I remember the first class I took at 24-hour fitness with my mother. I was bored. It was a yoga class I felt was boring. I come from athletic background, sports background. I played basketball throughout pretty competitively in high school. Chose not to play competitively after high school, but continued to play basketball in different leagues throughout college. And when I lived in South Africa, I actually ended up playing for the university's women's basketball team. So moving my body, training, exercising, lifting weights, running, all of those has been a pretty big part of my life since I was young. But I don't come from dancing background or gymnastic background, so which makes my body at the time quite tight because of the athletic and sports background. I wanted to mention that because many yoga teachers come from gymnastic and dancing background and they tend to be more bendy. So fast forward to the time I lived in South Africa after trying out a couple yoga classes here and there during college. When I moved to South Africa, there was a time that my friend introduced me to Bikram yoga. And that was the first time I really enjoyed the yoga practice because Bikram was so challenging. It gave me the similar challenge that sports would give me. And I loved the challenge. I loved really trying to go beyond the limit of where I think I could go. So I really enjoyed Bikram. But fast forward again, after graduating from my master's degree, I left South Africa and I started to travel quite a bit. I traveled all across South and Central America for quite a long time, backpacking with my best friend. I also got a job in Nicaragua working for a nonprofit organization doing organic farming work. And then that led me to working for a tourism company leading group travel trips in Hawaii and also parts of California, Glacier National Park. I also got to travel Spain and Italy with this company. One of the travel company that I really got involved with was an active travel company. So I led trips on a bicycle. It was a beautiful, beautiful experience and part of my life where I got to travel so much and see amazing and beautiful part of the world on a bicycle. This background is to just kind of give you more of my sports background. So when I was working in this travel company, I would look for a yoga studio in every town that I was based at and practice yoga a couple times a week, as much as I could in between my jobs and in between my travel, between my trips. And that's when I started to get a little bit more serious or interested in yoga. What really hooked me into yoga was the physical movement part of the practice overlapped with spirituality of the practice. Since I was raised in a Buddhist household, something about spirituality of yoga felt like home and felt familiar and also felt right. Becoming a yoga teacher has been an idea that was floating around my head since I lived in South Africa. And at some point, my body became too tired of traveling all the time for a job, living out of backpack, living out of my suitcase, not really having a home base and just going from one place to the next, not having roots. That was tiring and exhausting me, my soul, and my physical body. During my off season of my travel job, I decided to sign up for yoga teacher training. I decided to sign up for 1 month intensive with Yoga Works in Santa Monica and told myself that let's see if I can work as a yoga teacher during this off season and see if I can make enough money to live, make this into my full-time job. And if it was not possible, then I will go back to my travel and touring job. After I graduated from 1 month long intensive yoga teacher training, I started to apply for yoga teaching jobs. I did more than teaching. I did kind of whatever I can. So I was a front desk person at a gym. I cleaned the gym. I taught spin classes. I taught different kind of fitness classes on top of yoga just so I can make it work. I can make enough to live in Long Beach. I also did not own a car, which cut my cost of living quite a bit. So I remember in the beginning of my teaching career, I was riding my bicycle to all my teaching jobs, which limited me on where I could apply and where I could teach because it has to be a biking distance from me. And I also lived in a tiny room in a 3-bedroom apartment with 3 other women. So my rent was quite low as well. I was actually able to make my living as a full-time fitness instructor, I would say. I was not only teaching yoga in the beginning. I had to teach other modalities to make enough income to live. But my goal was always to teach yoga, slowly reducing the number of non-yoga classes from my schedule and then slowly increasing my yoga classes into my schedule so I could become a full-time yoga teacher. And fast forward many, many years, after many, many trainings and continuing education later, I'm still teaching yoga full-time, Now I don't teach other modalities. I just teach yoga, and I love it. So being a full-time yoga teacher was possible for me, but it wasn't easy. I remember in the beginning, I was trying to find other full-time yoga teachers that I could ask questions about how many classes are you teaching to make enough to live? Where do you teach? How long have you been teaching? What else do you do besides teaching group yoga classes? Do you have private clients? If so, how many? Do you teach only at yoga studio, or what are other locations, other places that you are teaching? These are the questions that was floating around my head in the beginning of my teaching career to see if it was possible to make a living as a full-time yoga teacher. And that is why I started this podcast, because I think a lot of people who finish 200-hour, or maybe who are thinking about doing 200-hour teacher training, wonder the same questions. Can I be a full-time yoga teacher? Is this possible? Is this financially feasible? Or does this mean I have to teach 40 classes a week to make 40 hours a week income? That's why this podcast is here, so you can get these answers from the interviews that I'm going to do with many amazing yoga teachers around the world. I want to say that everybody has their own unique path they choose in yoga teaching world, especially if you're doing this as your full-time job. Because a lot of time, teaching group classes aren't going to be enough. Or it's not going to be sustainable for you to teach that many classes per week to make a living. So a lot of these teachers who's been teaching for quite a long time have found other interesting streams of income or unique way they set up their business to be able to teach yoga as a full-time. And that is what I want to share in this podcast. Not that there's one size fit all way to live your life as a full-time yoga teacher, but how everybody's path is so unique. And I will be sharing my path as this podcast evolves. I don't think I'll have time to share everything today. I am also fascinated in how other teachers makes it. So I want to first define what full-time yoga teacher is. What is it? What does it mean to be a full-time yoga teacher? And my definition is going to be different than other yoga teachers' definition of full-time yoga teacher. So I just want to share my definition. I think full-time yoga teacher is somebody who makes majority of their income from yoga-related jobs, whether that's teaching or non-teaching yoga-related. It does not mean you teach 40 classes a week. It does not mean you work 40 hours a week teaching yoga. Because if you are a yoga teacher, you will know teaching 40 classes a week is outrageous and impossible. And if somebody listening who have taught 40 classes a week, I have huge respect for you. I know that's challenging, and I hope you don't have to do that for the rest of your life. It's not easy. The most number of classes I have taught weekly in my teaching career so far has been 28 classes a week, and I don't wish that on anyone. So when I say full-time yoga teacher, it means that you are able to make a living as a yoga teacher, whether you have other streams of income that is non-yoga related, but majority of your income come from yoga related job. And it doesn't have to be all face-to-face teaching hours. I think there are two categories of full-time yoga teachers. I think one category of full-time yoga teacher is somebody who can make enough money to support themselves financially on their own. And I think there are a second category of full-time yoga teacher who are able to continue teaching yoga as a full-time job because they have other support. For example, maybe they have support from their family. Their rent is maybe free because they live with their family, or their rent is cheaper because they have support from their family or partner. Maybe because the partner brings in good chunk of income that as a yoga teacher, you don't have to teach as much to bring in a certain amount of income to keep a roof over your head. Or maybe you have inheritance, or maybe you have a huge saving from your previous career. So I think there are yoga teachers who do this full time, but has some kind of a financial cushion that they don't have to be solely using the yoga teaching income as their living expenses, or to be able to live. The reason why I make these two distinct categories is because when I first was starting out as a teacher and was asking questions about how I can make it as a full-time yoga teacher, these categories I needed these categories for the answers to make sense, for numbers to add up, to see if it was possible for me to make it as a full-time yoga teacher. And I think these distinct categories make sense and can be helpful for anyone who is thinking about quitting their day jobs to become a full-time yoga teacher. I fall on the category of yoga teacher who do have to make enough income on my own to be financially independent and stable. And I have always been in that category since I started teaching yoga. And that is why these questions that I had at the beginning of teaching career was a big question for me. I really wanted to know these answers. And I am not saying that one category of teacher is better than or superior than other category. But I think categorizing these two things are important for anybody who's trying to be a yoga teacher. Because if you don't know which category these teachers fit in, then you're not going to get the answers that you are wanting or you are needing to see whether you can make a living as a full-time yoga teacher, if that makes sense. From teaching full-time for quite many years in city of Los Angeles, which is probably one of the most expensive places to live, I think I have few things to be able to share. I'm not a business expert. I'm not a marketing expert. I'm not even a yoga expert. But I think by sharing my experience, my journey, my mistakes, what I learned along the way can be and will be very helpful for other yoga teachers who are on the similar path or who are thinking about becoming a yoga teacher, whether full-time or not. That is why I am so excited to start this podcast and not only share my experience, but also wisdoms that other full-time yoga teachers will share on the upcoming episodes. Number one advice that I would give to a brand new teacher or somebody who are in teacher training right now or who is thinking about joining teacher training is that continuing education is so important. Never stop learning. Learn in a pace that feels feasible to you, but just know that 200 hours is just opening of the door into the whole world of yoga. Your learning never stops. We are always student of yoga first before a teacher. So never stop learning. Number two is that don't lose your own practice. And I'm not saying you have to practice asana, physical yoga practice every day, 60, 75, 90 minutes a day. But I think it is important to continue your yoga practice in whatever forms that may be. And that is probably going to evolve as you evolve throughout the journey of yoga teaching and practicing yoga. So those are the two wisdoms I want to share today. Is to never stop learning and don't lose your own practice. Now, I want to talk about next week's episode. Next week, I will be sharing interview I had with my dear friend, and I also consider her my mentor, somebody I look up to, and her name is Karen. We had an amazing conversation together, and she shared so many beautiful gems that I cannot wait for you to hear. If you have any questions, recommendations for who to interview, or if you want to stay connected with me, You can follow me on Instagram. My Instagram is at Reika Yoga, ReikaYoga. And I have an online yoga studio. You can find all the information about my online studio on reikayoga.com. I teach live Zoom classes a few times a week, as well as a bunch of recorded classes in my on-demand library. And I would really appreciate you sharing this podcast with your fellow yoga teachers. Thank you for listening, and I cannot wait for you to listen to our next week's episode with Karen.